This is Me, I Am Mental, the podcast. A quick disclaimer. The content you find here is neither intended to be therapy or diagnosis. It is provided for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of Me I'm Mental, the podcast. On this podcast, we discuss all things mental. We aim to provide factual, credible, impactful, and ultimately engaging information on mental health. My name is Charles Adede.
And my name is Darren Collins, and it's a pleasure to host you once again at Me, I Am Mental. Today, our guest is the Honorable Sylvia Kasanga, and Sylvia is going to talk to us soon about mental health and her role in government. But first, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about who we are as Me, I Am Mental. You can find us at meiammental.me, and that's sort of our clearinghouse for all of our content. Good tips and advice, and us giving direction to things that we find helpful, as well as a portal to all of our social media on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. meiammental.me is a place to go, and we don't want anything from you right now except for you to like and share the content, because we feel like this is there's room in the space for guys like Charles and I who really aren't experts, but we are profoundly interested in the subject to better ourselves and to improve our own mental health, as well as provide a resource for other people who may be looking for just some guidance or just more information about what it means to be mentally healthy. But having said all that, let's just get started. And Charles, you can begin introducing our wonderful guest.
Yes, it's actually a great honor today to have Mahesh, like we call them, on set. And I'm really, really grateful to you for agreeing to do this. I think what we would like to discuss today is of great importance and significance for anybody in this country, and also for those who are affected by mental health. And this is largely, the conversation today is largely going to center on the Mental Health Act 2022, which the Honorable was very, very instrumental in pushing through Parliament and seeing it actually assented to and become an act. It's a long story. It has many interesting twists and turns, but I think the Mental Health Act has considerably improved at least the legal and policy position for mental health in Kenya, but we will get into those details a little further down. As usual, on this podcast, we also like to have our audience get a personal sort of glimpse at who exactly our guest is, and so we are going to interrogate her a bit so that we have a more personal, up close profile. So and also, I suppose, as we talk, part of what we're trying to do through this podcast is to show people that mental health is different from mental illness. We need to create, and we want as many people as possible to stay on the mentally healthy side of things. And through personal stories, sometimes of resilience, of the things we do to survive tough times, or the things that the people who give us support, and people will get to see mental health in a more holistic way. So that's why, a personal story also always helps.
Yes, it does.
Yes. So where do we start?
I'm excited because apparently the gate man immediately recognized you. Why is that? As someone who's only lived here for 8 years, I don't know. I don't know everything.
Yes.
Well, my name betrays me.
Oh, okay.
In many ways. That's why the gate
good ways?
man.
Did I just already cross the line? Okay.
in a very good way.
Okay.
I always say that I stand on the shoulders of my late father and my mom. because they are great people. They have done a lot for their community back at home in Machakos and Makueni. That's where we come from. That's where we grew up, and that's where my parents come from.
Okay.
And they've made very impactful contributions to the society in many ways, including politics. And that's why the name betrays me. That's why the gate man will recognize that when I say Kasanga, it is not any other Kasanga, but Kasanga Mulwa, who is my late father, and who was a great politician in Machakos.
Yes.
So that begins to also tell you how I found my way into politics. The apple does not fall too far from the tree. Yes.
Yeah, so one of the questions we wanted to ask is, how was it grow? So sometimes growing up in a family like that, either can be like tremendous like support and a brilliant experience, or it can be also very, because you are growing in the shadow of great people.
Yeah.
So the pressure can be very, very intense. What was it like growing up?
It can be. We like reminiscing and looking back at what life was when we were growing up. It was a beautiful life, I must say, because my mom was largely a teacher for a long time. But dad was very active in politics, but he was also a lawyer and an arbitrator as well. So he was very professional. And he served in the judiciary as well. When he retired from politics, he went into judiciary and became an educationist alongside with my mother, and they started the schools. So for us, it was, yes, we're in their shadow, but they let us be. There was never, you must be this or you must be that. That was not there. But of course, the pressure to perform was obviously there when your mother is a teacher. I mean, you cannot bring bad grades home. Neither can you behave badly.
Yes.
To this day, in front of my mom, we speak carefully. You still can't just behave the way you want. That's a typical teacher in the African setting as we were growing up. But it was a good life, a lot of exposure from our parents as much as they could with what they had at that time. And I am certainly who I am today because of them, without a doubt.
So were you daddy's girl, mommy's girl? Can you?
I think more of daddy's girl.
Yeah, it follows, right?
Well, she didn't become a teacher.
And in a way, although I went into architecture,
yes,
I find myself now in dispute resolution. And, the late Kasanga Mulwa was one of the people who brought arbitration into the country.
Yes.
They're actually the pioneers and the ones who started the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators here in Nairobi and Kenya. So he's a pioneer in arbitration, and before he died, he made sure I have joined the fraternity, and I'm a passionate dispute resolver advocate. You know that.
I know.
I even sponsored a bill in ADR, so
yes.
I'm passionate about it. I am mentoring. I have upgraded myself significantly. I'm constantly training. I just finished a training last week to upgrade in the dispute resolution. So I could have been a lawyer.
Easily.
Yes, easily. But I am in the construction industry, which I also really love significantly.
In fact, so how did you end up there, considering, again, that is a space? Architects. I think as of now, we begin to see more and more architects, lady architects. I have to throw this in there just for good measure. My sister-in-law, she's called Amy, she's an architect. But one of the few lady architects. The thing is, it's still a space, construction, architecture, it's male-dominated.
Very male-dominated, yes.
And I'm sure, how was it for you? What
Wow, did I find myself there? It's a very interesting story. I went to, of course, primary school, I went in Machakos. That's where we grew up, in Machakos. My mom was a teacher at the Machakos Teachers College as we grew up. But when boarding schools came, when private boarding schools were introduced in the country, back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I was taken to boarding school so that I can do very well, which I did. And I went to high school in Loreto Limuru, so I'm a Quotidian, class of 94. I'm not young because people tend to think I'm very young. So let me declare here, class of 94. And from there, at Form 4, during those days of 844, you would do a selection of what you want to do in university. In fact, you would select the programs you want to do, and you would select the university that you want to do. And I just knew what I did not want to do, but I did not know what I wanted to do for some strange reason. So my selections were a BA, that was my first selection in University of Nairobi. And then I think I had picked surveying in Nairobi University, valuing in Nairobi University, just generally in that space. But interestingly enough, the letter that finally came was from Jomo Kenyatta. It wasn't even in my choices. It was architecture, Jomo Kenyatta. I didn't know what it was. I don't come from a family that did architecture, so nobody could help me. So I said, you know what, let me go to the university. Let me first visit this place. I don't even know where it is.
So architecture was not on your list of things you don't want to do.
It was
not. It just wasn't on the list at all.
It was not on the list at all. Who knew about architecture
not
back
me.
in the 90s?
Yeah. I'm class of 96. We're not that old.
Not that old. Yeah, so I made a trip to Jomo Kenyatta, and I remember I've never forgotten that first day because I met a Professor Otoki who took me to the architecture department and showed me what it is like. And those days, Jomo Kenyatta was in partnership with JICA,
yes,
the Japanese Institute of something. So there was some prestigiousness about Jomo Kenyatta. It was a very small campus. The standards were high. I remember walking into the library and seeing all these sort of books and materials and, pens and papers that would be given to the students. And then there were models of sixth-year students which they had done, and the professor was showing me, and he said, you see, this is the sort of thing you're going to do. And he advised, you know what, you're young, you come do 1 year. And if you don't like it, you can always change. So I took his advice, and I did 1 year. And by the end of that 1 year, I discovered I could draw. I discovered I could think in the third dimension.
Okay.
I realized I could be inspired by, because they had these programs in the first year where you do something called design in nature. You walk in the nature, you pick something that inspires you, you come back and you do some form, some 3D form. And that was the most exciting time of my life.
Okay. Really?
And then I never looked back. Yeah, I stuck it there. I went back home after 1 year. I said to my parents, hey, I'm here. It's going to be 6 years, but I'm going to do this. Yeah. It's good. And I love what I do. I can tell you that. And then, after architecture, I did a master's in business administration in USIU. And that is simply because I was very clear in my mind, I wanted to do my own business. I've always been clear that I wanted to do my own business. So I said, let me do a business course to sort of help me integrate that. And once I had finished my master's paper project, I started working from the living room of our little home in Nairobi, but then I had moved into the city. I'm not a city girl.
Okay.
That's when I moved into the city and started off the real hustle. The real hustle. Yes.
And that would have been like year 2000?
2002.
2002.
2002, okay. 2003.
Okay.
Yes. So that's where my journey into architecture started. I started running my farm. You rely on parents and parents' friends to start you off. Yes. Lots of residential houses. When my parents started the schools, then I got a chance to do some school design, courtesy of my parents. So really, they were, they were really the backbone. They were really the backbone. So I can say my hustle probably was not as hard because I had them, and they would refer me their friends. But it was not until 2005 that I got my first big client of my own here in the city, and that was a big deal for me. My own big project, which I managed to get approvals and, push and, sit through the construction meetings of a big team where you're the only woman. Those days, it was really male dominated.
I know.
It was really, really male dominated. I would be the only female on the entire site, other than the mama who's cooking the githeri for lunch. Oh. Yeah, it was really, really quite something. It has really changed to this day.
Yes.
So I got my first big client, and with architecture, it's about referrals. One satisfied client is going to bring you clients. And I think for me, I really thank God for that particular client, because I owe it to him. A lot of my work between that time and maybe up to 2012, thereabouts, before the election of 2013, things were really looking up at that time. Mm-hmm. My firm grew. I got partners. I have partners who we have sort of grown up together and, moved offices, finally bought an office and settled. So it was an upward trajectory up until the election of 2013, where things sort of stabilized in a certain way, but that was across board in the entire economy in the country. Then I started doing arbitration about say I have about 15 years in arbitration, actually. About 14 to 15 years. Because I started my entry course, and I took time before I started my module 1. Dilly-dallying, because architects and reading were a bit slow on that front. So it took a while to realize, okay, I need to really get into it. And my dad would encourage me. So just around the time he passed away, I had made a promise that I'll finish. So I started my module 1 and I would dilly-dally. So I made sure I've done my module 2 and 3. And I finished and I started practicing. And then last year is when I upgraded into fellowship. So now I'm a fellow at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations.
It's quite an accolade.
I know.
Yeah, it's quite
that
an
is
accolade.
something else.
Yeah, it's quite
right.
something. And I find myself more and more in the dispute resolution space.
Yes.
Because I've also done a lot of the practice. So I've left it for the younger people in the architecture practice. And I only do advisory, design work. Of course, my eye for design is still as vibrant. And I'm still a creative to that extent. But then I spend probably a lot more of my time now doing my dispute resolution. But that's the long and the short of my story, my career story. Yeah.
How does an architect get into arbitration? Is there a connection there I'm missing?
Big connection.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't know anything.
Huge connection. In fact, I'll tell you what. I'm always trying to convert architects into arbitrators, but it's not easy.
No.
Because it requires a lot of reading, which is not what we kind of do. You know, we are more visual and we want to draw and do things like that. But the fact remains, when you're a team leader and you're running a site, you're definitely doing contract management of a site. You're overseeing what you have, designed, what you have put on paper alongside with your engineers. You're executing it on the ground. So you're monitoring what the contractor is doing and monitoring the contract agreement between the contractor and the developer.
The architect does all that.
Yes, the architect does that. He's a team leader. He's a very powerful person.
I always just imagine it was someone who draws buildings and is like, that's the kind of lumber you're going to use.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, but I didn't realize they actually
You kind of have to oversee.
actually oversee the whole
you
project.
kind of have to oversee the whole project.
Okay.
And
I always thought of it as a technical,
you have
part.
to oversee. And every time there's any near conflict between the contractor and the developer, or the contractor and his subcontractors, you're the first point of call.
Really?
Yes. So actually, we are natural dispute resolvers.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't label it, but it comes as part of the work we do.
I see.
So now what arbitration does is it puts the label in and trains you now to actually think like a dispute resolver.
So when you make that shift, do you end up arbitrating still within the same field, or are you now prepared to arbitrate in all kinds
That's
of
a good
fields?
question. With arbitration is you are a master of your trade. That's why you are an arbitrator. You're a judge away from court.
Okay.
Because you're a master at what you do. So you stay within that field.
Okay, so generally speaking, arbitrators will stay within their own field. Do they automatically get to branch out to other fields if they want to, or do they have to do other education in order?
Yeah, you have to do more education. Like if I wanted to do arbitrations that are not within the construction industry, then definitely I have to go back to arbitration school, or maybe even go back to university. Actually, I could go and do a law degree, for instance, which could expand, my field. The lawyers are lucky to the extent that because of a law degree, they can practice a bit more broadly. But we still find, and they find that to be most effective in arbitration, then they have to sort of specialize.
Okay.
So you find lawyers who have specialized in construction matters, who have, specialized in oil and gas. But to find somebody who's, so broadly across board, you may find that they are not probably as good arbitrator as maybe they could be.
Okay, so that's the question.
Specialized.
Okay, so that's the question.
Actually, the interesting thing is, from a lawyer's standpoint, is part of the reason I've always been hesitant to do arbitration is precisely because of what you said. It is that you need, for you to be an effective arbitrator, you need to be a subject matter specialist in a specific area, and then that way you actually bring value to the disputants. And yes, but otherwise what you are is just a generalist, and often we find that we are at sea. We are not very, because what we bring is the legal aspect of things, and so you're right. You're right. So lawyers are not necessarily.
I forgot my question. need brain arbitration.
So
No, my question was, so are you required by law to go to school to learn about that industry, or can you just be like, oh, I can do health?
Oh well, you'll be caught out if you're out there without adequate training.
Okay.
You might find nobody will give you a brief because you've been tried once and you've been flagged.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a small industry. They flag each other. The lawyers they talk amongst each other because you see, when somebody is having a dispute, they will speak to their lawyer first most of the time, and the lawyers are the ones to either advise, look at the contract, and say no, this is an arbitration situation. We need to go. Sometimes they run to court. The ones who don't read the contract very well will run to court, and the court will tell them, no.
So when someone says,
you go back,
when someone says, I'm an arbitrator, my follow-up should be what kind?
Yes. That would be a nice way to go about it.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Of course, coming from a layman's, that would be the right way to ask.
Definitely a layman.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the next, and just touching on that, well, I don't know whether we wait for this, because I'll wait to ask this after my next question, which is, there is all this, and then there's politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know.
How did that happen?
How?
Were you coerced?
So I know it's there in the DNA somewhere, but then there is also some sort of latency. In DNA, you can act on it or not act on it.
Yeah.
But at some point, you decided, okay, I'm going to take the plunge.
To do this, yes.
Right.
And you're very right. Because the family comes, I come from a family of politicians, and politicians who engage very actively in local politics. And in our country, politics is local, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
So the space has always sort of been there within the party for my late father. The space has always been there one way or another. And after he had passed away, the election of 2017, he had been very instrumental in bringing the vote, the block of the vote around that time. Very instrumental. So there was some space. There was some space somewhere.
Yes.
And so the opportunity presented itself. And I have, it's a special seat, and it only goes to women. And we're just me and my sister. And my sister said, she said no. And even my first instinct would have been, no. Politics is not my thing. I'm not a politician. I'm not the politician in the family. But at the same time, I said, this is not an opportunity that comes every day. I said, you know what, Mom? Let me do this. What's the worst that could happen? I remember our conversation, what's the worst that could happen? I am clear in my mind. I have to keep my office running. My very active architectural office and arbitration practice has to continue. But we can find a way of, still serving in the House, while we are still running this. And the beauty of a nominated seat is that you don't really have constituents. So you don't have to worry about, endless streams of people coming to seek you for, solutions of their issues. So I said, let me do this. And I accepted it and did what I needed to do. And my party leader absolutely loved the CV. And he said, for once, let's see what a professional can do with this seat.
Yes. That's wonderful.
For a change. Yeah, so I really owe it also to the party leader for having made that determination.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, with some of these things, the buck stops with the party leader.
Yes.
Another thing we have to admit, whether we like to admit it or not, our political parties are as such.
Yes.
Yeah. So the final determination is made by the party leader. And he said, this CV, let's see what is going to happen. And when the nomination came through, because in the end, it's about how the party has performed, that will determine the number of nominated slots the party gets. So the performance of the party was not so good at Senate level. We had only 2 elected senators at that time. So we only got 1 slot for nomination. So that was me who got in. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal. In fact, it was a big deal for the entire Ukambani region. And my party leader called me. And, I said to him, I'm so grateful, but I need to know what is your expectation. And he said, you have a CV that is strong. We want to see what you're going to do with this CV. So, kind of that puts a weight on you.
Yes.
Now you really have to, show yourself. You really have to rise to the occasion and show yourself. But that's how I found myself in the House. That's the long of the short.
Okay.
Yes. And I had to find my voice.
Yes.
Yeah, I had to find my voice. I had to get into the mix, and the party leader pointed me in the right direction and said, these are the people you need to follow, hang out with. They're going to help you. And they helped me so that I can, break into the parliamentary system, which is, I'm telling you, is a whole different world, completely.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing you can possibly imagine. So you have to keep removing one hat and putting it down where another. So when I was doing the back and forth from my office, my professional work, to parliament life, it was crazy. Let me just say it was crazy.
What did that do for your mental health at that point? And the point I'm thinking about is the point when you requested by the party leader, what do you want me to do? And he said, no, I'm looking to you for that. I always feel like, naturally, like that's a greater level of pressure than someone just saying, here's your assignment, because that's a clear path. So when it's wide open, I find that for myself, that increases my stress levels and my sense of responsibility and everything. How did you roll right with it, or did you take some deep breaths?
It was a lot of pressure. No lies about it. It was a lot of pressure. I was not really myself, because first you've been thrown into this limelight. It was my choice, so I can't say and go and weep at somewhere. No, I've put myself out there, so I have to sort of find myself and rise to the occasion. And at the same time, I am fearful of letting people down.
Yeah.
I am fearful, sincerely, not just my party leader, but my family as well, because it is upon their shoulders that I find myself. Then lastly, there's also my own personal reputation. My career has been built on purely my reputation. And the house that is parliament, I mean, a lot of drama happens there. Your reputation could today be instantly finished by a thing you said, or a thing you did, or in a manner you appeared, or something somebody said about you, So there was a lot of pressure. And by the time I found a cause to run with that then I could hang on to and feel comfortable and run with it, that first almost 8-9 months were very stressful for me. I didn't sleep well. I didn't eat well. There was a lot of fumbling, not knowing quite what to do, in as much as there are people helping you with direction. The parliament staff are very helpful. You feel lost. There's that feeling of, I'm not quite, what am I doing here? And then what makes it worse is when you're a person who cares, because I care. For me,
it's so much harder.
It bothers me that I have a big salary coming into my bank account, and I'm not yet showing what I'm doing with it. Where's the impact that I'm creating? This is a seat that is supposed to create impact, change the lives of Kenyans. Out of 67, you can count 67 senators, divide by the population of this country, you could easily say you have so many hundreds of thousands of Kenyans looking up to you to make an impact to their lives.
Definitely.
So for me, it weighed on me, actually very heavily. And that first year was very tough. I kept really grappling, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do with myself? You try something like this, you don't get far, you don't get support. You find, okay, I can't go this direction. I'll try sanitary pads. You find no too much politics there. I'll try girls in something. You try and run with it. You find there's no support there. Your fellow parliamentarians who are elected always see you as a threat. So you will not get much support, yet you can't do too much because you don't quite have a budget for it, So all sorts of challenges along the way.
When you mentioned that you had sleepless nights, I can think of two causes. One can be like you're overworking and you're staying up late, or you're trying to maintain but your brain is running and keeping you up. Was it from overworking, or was it from that spiral?
It's the not so much overworking, but that thought process that is a spiral.
Yeah.
And because you've not quite settled, you've not quite found your balance. I have to run to my office. I still have to see some clients. In the meantime, my chair of committee wants me, because I am a technical person. I was in the infrastructure committee, and they want an opinion about, say, the NSSF building where loads of money was stolen. They want to understand how consultants are paid, so they need me there. And I'm thinking, okay, will I let go of my client and run to parliament? What if I miss my client?
Yeah.
So there was that period before I found my balance. And at the same time, besides finding my balance between my career and parliament work, there's also the fact that I still haven't found a cause to run within parliament. So it was on various levels.
Yeah.
It was just the brain just so awake because you can't find your balance, and that is not a nice place to be.
And so here's a question. In terms of your professional, a career sort of oriented person, very structured, maybe inclined to deliver through policy and that policy changes and that sort of thing. And then you have, on the other hand, you're working, I assume, largely with people who are real political animals, you know, whose agenda is political survival, one, and number two, political survival, number three, political survival.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm assuming that just finding your space in that, finding your footing in that space in itself is quite something.
It was hard.
And then also knowing that whatever it is you have to achieve, you must still achieve it with these guys.
That's right. You still need them.
So, swimming with the sharks.
You have to. You need them. You need their support. So honestly, it was until I landed my mental health work, which I shall explain, that I finally found my balance. Because then I could say in Parliament, I can't be everywhere. I can't be in all, you know, the opportunities that come with Parliament. I can't be. And because now I have a cause, I'm going to stick to my cause. This is the cause that will take me to Parliament. I'll go to Parliament when I need to go to Parliament. Because then I have an agenda that I'm pushing, that I'm chasing. So that's when my balance actually happened. Because now I was clear in my mind, this is my mandate in this house. And this is my end. The end is an act of Parliament. At the very best, that is my end. So my goal was as such. And the Parliament staff are good at helping you map out that journey. They're very good and extremely supportive. So I was able then to find that balancing act where then I could say Monday, Tuesday is office work. Wednesday, I'll do Parliament, I'll engage. I'll put in a statement on Wednesdays. I'll put in a motion maybe on Thursdays. Then Friday is strictly my office work. So I was able to now begin to put a structure to my life. Because like rightfully you said, I am extremely structured. Now politicians can't be structured because every day in a politician's life is absolutely different. The way you sleep and the way you wake up are two different worlds. And a lot happens between the hours of sleep and waking up.
Oh, no.
People change their minds, people change their allegiance and things like that. So it helped that first I was doing an act of Parliament that was not controversial. Not many people understood it. So the most they could do is try and understand what I'm trying to achieve. And when they did, they gave me support because they all realized it touches on them. So there was no one in the House of Parliament, both at National Assembly and at Senate, who had any issue with that act of Parliament. So it was easy to lobby. And I did not use any money. Probably it is the only act of Parliament I can comfortably say there was no money used to lobby and get support.
Yeah.
And it got voted on at every stage fully. And it was embraced by the senators. The senators embraced the mental health bill conversation. Actually, let me say conversation because from the first time I introduced it in the House, it stuck on everybody's lips. And it would pop up once in a while. In between debate of any other item, you would hear a mention of mental health. And whatever it is we are debating, the impact it has on the mental wellness of Kenyans or the victims or, you know, something like that. So I know I made an impact to that extent. But until I got that cause, it was chaos in my mind.
How did you get the cause? I mean, was someone come to you? Was it external? Was it something you felt amongst yourself because of the stress? Was it a family situation or a friend that made you go, aha? What's that moment?
I'll tell you what. I had never known that those stress events have anything to do with mental health. I didn't know. Like most of us, we don't connect the two because we have no awareness, we have no information, we don't know. So now my journey towards starting the mental health started from, I think I did relay this when you invited me one time. As part of looking for my cause, I reached out to Makueni youth. And the youth there had formed themselves into a youth enterprise service. So they were quite organized. They had a little lobby group they had formed with the help of the governor. that would go around, dealing with youth issues, and they would bring them to the county government, and the county governor would try and help them or try and find solutions for them. So I called out to the team leader and his team, and I told them, come and visit me in my office in Nairobi. Come, you have another senator, you have 2 senators. Come and tell me what I can do for you as young people. Of course, they came with a whole list. If you ask people, you have a problem, you have to be very careful.
I can make a list right now.
You have to be very careful. There was a whole list that was brought to me, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, okay, what have I done? But we went through the list nonetheless. And the thing that I circled was an issue they brought on drug use and abuse, and single mothers, very young single mothers, who end up in the pubs along the Mombasa Highway. The Mombasa Highway, Makueni County has a long frontage of the Mombasa Highway. So there are little towns, many of them, and they end up being truck stops, and that attracts all sorts of vices, and as you can imagine, what happens there. So a lot of the youth who don't make it either to high school for whatever reason, or to campus for whatever reason, the girls who end up pregnant, and single mothers, they somehow end up in those little towns, working in the pubs, and it's not the quality of lifestyle you want for any young people. But what even makes it worse is drug use, substance abuse. And they would use, there are some cheap drugs that hang around in our village towns, and they use 50 bob. You work for 100 bob, and you use half of that to get onto those Mubuka and others, and they are really destroying, their mental wellness. So I kind of circled that, and I said to these guys, okay, I don't have much of a budget, but I've singled out this question, and I will go and make some inquiries about it, on what we can do. But I will not want to do something, short, quick stopgap. Sure. I want to do something, for the long term, because clearly it's a problem that has been for a long time. The effects of these will run through generations, and then we have to mitigate any future. So I took that with me, and I thanked them for coming. And at that same time, we were running a small program with some Polish doctors who had been introduced to me on maternal health care. They had brought some machines for monitoring baby baby in the womb in a very remote area.
Okay.
So we had just gone and deposited the machines with the governor. I think it was the next day or 2 days after my meeting with the young people. Then we sat with the doctors at the end of the day somewhere, and then I said to them, I have this question. What do you guys do in Poland about this situation? And the first thing the doctor said was, you need to look into your mental health laws and how you organize yourselves in mental health. And I said, how is that connected?
What's the connection?
What's the connection with mental health? Because when you say mental health, the only thing I'm thinking about is that the psychotic man in the marketplace. That's what is mental health.
The guy drinking shampoo on the street.
That's the guy. So I said, now how are these connected? And he said, actually, they're very connected, but maybe you need to get some more information. So the group of doctors we were with, they spoke amongst themselves, and they organized a psychiatrist to come and see me in my office. So Dr. Kitazi is the one who came. She had been the superintendent at Mathare for over 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. There couldn't have been a more appropriate person to be sent to my office.
That's great.
That day.
Yeah.
And we sat for 4 hours. 4 hours. I was given, I call it mental health 101 lesson.
You did a course.
Crash program.
Crash program.
Yes.
For 4 hours. She was patient with me. It was wonderful. She broke it down for me. What is this thing? What are these illnesses? Right? And she described the whole spectrum, from those simple stresses we talk about, through to the anxieties and the disorders, the food disorders and all the others, the depression. And then you go to the more adverse mental health illnesses, the bipolar and the schizophrenia. And sometimes the way they mix up, and they can become very complex. And we discussed that entire spectrum. And then what needs to be done, how to, mitigate. I mean, there's nothing we didn't discuss. And at the end of that, she also gave her own personal experience at Mathare and the challenge she had running Mathare without a budget, and the impact it had on the inpatients. And those also, we know we have inpatients from the prisons who are part of Mathare.
Sure.
So she described this scenario that leaves you shuddering, And I asked her at the end, what do you think I can do with this platform, to change this? And she said, you have to change the act. There's no act. It was the 1989 Act, slightly amended in 96, very old dated. And since we got the new constitution, nobody in the ministry or in the fraternity had thought of getting the law amended to be in tandem with the new constitution in the list. So I knew my work was cut out. Actually, I remember at the end of that meeting, my heart was palpitating.
I found it.
Yeah, that light bulb moment. That was that day.
Yeah.
That day I knew this is it. This is it. This is the reason I am in Parliament.
Wow.
And I ran with it. I immediately ran with it. There was no sleeping. Now it was excitement. For me now it became excitement. There was a fire burning in me. I got some research done by our research team in Parliament. Parliamentarians are accorded a lot of support, let me tell you. You ask for research, in a week it's on your table. It's comprehensive research. We have the best researchers in that Parliament. I got best practices. I got to see what other jurisdictions are doing. I could see the gaps. They were able to highlight some of the studies that had been done by KNHCR. KNHCR had done a very comprehensive study on the state of mental health in this country, 2011.
Oh.
Yeah, chains of something I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
Very comprehensive they had done. The previous Parliament, there's a Parliament, I think the 9th or the 10th, Mathare had been brought to their attention. They did an inquiry on Mathare and they had given a whole raft of recommendations that were gathering dust. So I was able to get all that together. There was an attempt to change the law in a different Parliament. I got that attempt. I looked at it. Then I went to the ministry. The key stakeholder in any act of Parliament is the ministry. So I made a call. It took me a while to find the right person to talk to.
Which ministry?
Health. This is the Ministry of Health.
MOH, okay.
Under the Directorate of Mental Health.
Okay.
So it took me a while to find the right person. But when I finally found him, Dr. Juguna, I met him in somebody else's office and he said, you see me, I don't even have a budget. So will you forgive me, Senator, but let's meet here at somebody else's office. What can I do for you? I said, well, I want to do an act of Parliament for mental health. Like, really? I'm like, yeah. And I wanted to know if there's anything the ministry can do, or if we can partner, or if we can do something like that. And he said, well, first, we don't have budgets, we don't have anything, so any effort will be appreciated. And he gave me some documents and said, these are the things we've attempted to do. I said, oh, there's no problem. I can go and integrate everything.
Yeah.
So it was a strange experience, of course. And I remember coming back to Parliament and speaking to our legislative director. He was the go-to person. When you're doing a law, there's a guy.
Yes.
It's called Dr. Okello.
Yes.
He's the sharpest legislative drafter that Africa probably has, because our drafting of bills is said to be very high quality. So I go back to him and I say, now what do I do? It seems the ministry may not, be supportive. I can't tell their positions. Like, no, don't wait for the ministry. You're a legislator, so you go ahead. And he assigned me somebody. He assigned me a drafter to work with. And we sat down with a wonderful lady called Sombe. And she, when we sat down and I explained to her what we wanted to do, she just owned it, Yeah. She just absolutely owned this whole thing. And we took all these pieces that we had, plus best practice, we put out a matrix and we agreed this is how this thing should look like. And I was advised, don't do a new mental health bill, because then it will fall into the problems of money bill and whatever, those battles that Senate and National Assembly used to have. He advised, don't do that. Let's just do an amendment. That way it will move faster. Because, time, a bill takes so long. So because of time, do an amendment bill. So Sombe put everything together. And the first draft was so good. I was so impressed by that girl. And she was working by herself. Probably we had 3 or 4 interactions. By the time we had something that now we could say, let's publish. But before we could publish...
And this was an amendment?
It was an amendment bill.
Okay.
Yeah. But really, it's like we amended
Overhaul.
everything. It was like an overhaul.
It's a little bit of a sleight of a hand.
Yeah. Ideally, we should have been doing a new one. But because of the challenges of senators cannot emanate a bill that has to do with money, then it would fall into, it would not move,
Maybe you need to explain that a bit to our viewers and the listeners, because they probably don't understand the intricacy there.
Yeah.
But
I don't understand, but I'm guessing it's all politics.
It's
difficult. Everything's hard.
Yeah. It is politics, but it was a bit of a, I would say, an unnecessary bottleneck, but it was there by standing orders of the two houses. Now we are bicameral. So there's the work that the Senate does, and the Senate is the overseer of counties. So the bills that Senate does must be bills to do with the counties. Then the National Assembly oversees the national government. So they can do bills that do with money, because after all, it is the executive that has the money.
It goes there.
And the battle has always been, what can you do about counties that does not require money? So the battle, so the line was always very thin. But the National Assembly would use that to stifle the power of the Senate. So it was always a running battle. And actually, a lot of the private members' bills in the Senate did not see the light of day because of that bottleneck, and it is the most unfortunate bottleneck.
Yeah, because like now,
very unfortunate.
Like in the case of mental health, some of the provisions involve government spending.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
Yes, so there's no running away from
spending.
In fact, I can barely imagine an act of parliament, a fresh one, that would not have some form of budgetary requirement.
Yes.
Amendments, yes, because you can be amending several clauses that have nothing to do with money, but an overall bill, more often than not, there will be some provision there for money. And like for mental health, what we are trying to do is to integrate mental health into the healthcare. So what does that mean for any hospital in level 2, 3, 4, and 5? Is that within that hospital there has to be provisions for consultations for mental health, outpatient, requirements for mental health, and maybe even inpatient if it's a big hospital. Then let there also be a wing somewhere for inpatient as well. So that integration would require money.
With something.
Yeah.
So at the point at which you had internalized, sort of seen the mental health picture for what it was before you started the process of drafting the bill, you saw gaps and you were horrified, or I'm assuming that was the case.
Yes, it was.
What gaps were these at the time? What were the most glaring issues that
informed the fire in my belly?
Yes.
All right. First and foremost is the archaic law. Let's just start with the gap that we are in a new constitutional dispensation. We have a new constitution that we are all celebrating all the time. Yet there's this part of ourselves that has been completely neglected legislatively. Big gap. Big gap. So that's number one. Number two, when I was made to understand what mental health, mental illness is about, and then you realize that it is an area that is literally completely neglected, because the experience of Dr. Kitazi in running Mathare, which is our single, for a long time, it's not the only one, but most of the time it is the only one that sees our, mentally ill patients, outpatients, inpatient, as well as those who are incarcerated. And at the same time, it is our referral center, and then it's also a training center. So Mathare is many things, yet it is treated like nothing when it comes to prioritizing it and funding it. So that was also shocking to me. Third is just the sheer lack of information. That as educated as I am, I did not realize that if I have an anxiety disorder, I'm actually mentally unwell. That the only mental unwellness and illness we know of is, again, I repeat, the psychotic man in the marketplace.
Yeah, we just assume that if we can't sleep, it's because we're having trouble sleeping.
Exactly. You're actually unwell.
Yeah.
And you can be treated. And there are various forms of treatment that are not necessarily medication. And there are many treatments that you can do such that when you have, the illnesses on the onset, and even sometimes even before you require medication, there's so much you can do. Those realizations made me think, why don't we know these things? Why don't we know these things? And me, who is so educated, so exposed, now I don't know, So that caused a lot of frustration in me.
Okay.
Yeah, and I said, now this thing, we have to change this level of awareness.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the other thing, of course, is the gap in provision of access to care for mental health. Of course, it's been neglected, so of course then there is no access to health care for mental health. So you don't have it in our universal health care that we had already started rolling out by that time. It's not there, The other, there's Madare, and then there are other mental health institutions. I think there are about 14 of them. You're even shocked that they are there, because who speaks of them? You're shocked that they're even there.
Yes.
Who speaks of them? Then you see the statistics of the practitioners, and then you realize, hey, we are doing poorly. I mean, the last time I checked, I think they had graduated maybe 5 or 6 new psychiatrists. So at most, there are maybe 110, and that's on the higher side. So in a population of 50 million,
yes.
we have 110 psychiatrists. The clinic officers who are trained in mental health, the nurses who are trained in mental health. I mean, the whole spectrum. The inpatient bed capacity in the country for mental health. I mean, the gap is so big. I wish I'd even come with those statistics. I mean, the gaps are so big. And a few conversations have happened. Like I said, there was a parliamentary inquest into Madare that had happened several parliaments before. And that report had been gathering dust. No attempt at, making the recommendations happen. And the recommendations were not bad. In fact, it is that far back, that parliament, I think it was the 9th parliament, that recommended that Madare should be an institution on its own, freestanding, institution on its own, funded with its own entire budget, away from the ministry budget. It was back in the 9th parliament. Yet nothing was done. That was effected only just recently, when our mental health advocacy, in fact, when the bill had passed Senate, the first round, is when the government was trying to run around, trying to catch up, because now the industry had really woken up at that time. So those are some of the reasons that just, my fire was burning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's always good to shed light on that, because it also helps us understand the scale of, say, the quote unquote issue. I don't want to call it a problem or the challenge. Let me say a challenge.
Yeah.
And also, I think it also highlights in terms of the focus. If you're to intervene, what do you need to focus on? And key amongst all the intervention is awareness.
Absolutely.
It's always awareness, because most of us don't even have the language to understand the most basic mental health issue we are facing, let alone preventing ourselves from, going into the pit, so to speak. So yeah, I really like how you've outlined it for us, at least some of the things that you picked out.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I just wanted to point out before we go into you taking us through how we got this act is, what is the role? Why should a government be concerned about mental health? On the list of government's priority, where do you think it should fall? And so the role of government and on the list of priorities, what is your take on that?
Actually, mental health should be right at the top.
Really?
Yes, it should be. Government should be such that they're so concerned about the mental wellness of their citizenry that they need to prioritize their mental wellness. And what do I mean by this? One time I visited Paraguay in my parliamentary work. Those are countries you only visit because you're in a parliamentary duty.
Yes.
But incidentally, Paraguay is, if you look at the happiness index of countries in the world, it's one of the happy countries. You'd be surprised.
Okay.
And the government has a ministry.
We need to emigrate to Paraguay.
Yeah, they
I
have
don't know where that is. It's next to Uruguay.
No.
Paraguay and Uruguay, they're like
Southern America is like across,
Uh-huh.
the globe. But they have a ministry of happiness. And what that ministry does, they recognize that...
Wait, Did you say a ministry of happiness?
Yes. It's not the only country with a ministry of happiness.
Did you guys know that?
There are several countries with ministries of happiness.
Okay, well, great.
Yeah. But you see,
Fascinating.
but the idea is that happiness, mental wellness, is so multi-sectoral. And because every sector is busy concentrating on its sector, you realize you may need somebody who now sort of brings them together.
Yes.
So that every ministry then can contribute its part towards the happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep getting feedback from the happiness people that maybe the education, like right now, Kenyans and our CBC and the challenges, you can imagine how much anxiety our education right now, transition, is causing our parents.
Yeah.
Parents are not sleeping very well. They're worried about the future of their countries, of their children. They're very worried.
Yes, I know that.
The feedback the parents are giving, you can see they're genuinely concerned.
I've noticed the crew that I work with, people's weight changes, people's attitudes change when their children are going from primary school to secondary school because the rates are higher, and it just there's a complete
it's very
change
stressful.
Just because of the cost of education.
Yeah. So that's one way. Look at our agriculture.
Yes.
And the kind of foods that we eat. If we had somebody looking out for our general wellness, they would be coming to the agriculture ministry and saying we need to change the policy on maize.
Yes, I know.
And bring in more, foods that are better for our general wellness of the body and the mind. And we propagate that conversation.
Nutrition being part of a fundamental.
Nutrition becomes a fundamental policy at national level. And everybody down in the counties, what are they called? Those officers that go, extension officers. We have extension officers who speak to nutrition. And what then we should be growing for our daily consumption.
Right. Like it used to be special that people tell me it used to be special to have chapatis. It was like a holiday. And now it's like for university students, it's like every single morning, rush and go, and their health is not great because of that.
Again, if we had happiness, somebody looking out for our general wellness, they would go to the sports ministry and tell the sports ministry, all Kenyans should be running 5 kilometers every morning because it's good for their wellness.
Create
and start creating those forums and infrastructure opportunities and start getting Kenyans out, get the president to run. You saw happening in Rwanda. Get the president out to run and call Kenyans, all governors every Saturday morning. Run, let's get Kenyans on their feet. Let's do physical exercise because it's part of the wellness. So you get my point.
What would they say to the media industry?
Media? Oh, please. let us be a bit more conscious of what we post. The way we frame our news.
I think
our news causes so much anxiety.
Yes.
Do you know how many Kenyans today are not watching news? They don't bother with news. Because what you get, if you go to sleep after your 9 o'clock news and you've watched it, you're not going to sleep. Your brain will be super active. You'll toss and turn. It will not be a peaceful sleep because what that news has done is caused you more anxiety than anything.
I've seen that a lot
in
my country. When I visit back and I see how much consumption of news is happening, people are on edge.
Yeah, people are on edge. So our media needs to look again into the kind of the method, the content, and maybe also the delivery method. The delivery method needs to be different. So there's so much. If a government would prioritize mental health and the happiness of their citizens, they would do things differently. They would prioritize things very differently. And the Ministry of Health, together with UN, it was World Bank and UN, one of the UNHCR. Is it UNHCR or UNDP? One of the two. UNDP. They did a study on the investment case for mental health in Kenya. I was part of that study. I was interviewed for that study. But the long of the short is they were trying to establish what is the cost of mental health burden on our economy. That's another reason why our country needs to prioritize mental health. When our citizens are unwell, we are losing to the tune of 62 billion annually, because then Kenyans are not engaging to their full potential.
So there's, in terms of this productivity, and then there is also maybe the cost of treating.
Of treating it, because we are not addressing the issue. Yeah. So they put it at a figure of 62 billion. That's significant.
It is significant.
That's significant.
Is there an intersection in labor as well with mental health? Like, does the government, if there was a happiness ministry, or if our mental health bills, how would they speak to labor and labor laws? Like, I mean, that's a contributor too. Like that.
It is a major contributor. In fact, I remember when we were doing the bill, the employers fraternity. What is it called? Employers. What are they called? The body of employers.
Okay.
Yes, now it skips my mind.
That one, yes. They came, and they themselves recognized that, you know, if the laborers are not mentally well, then the companies are suffering. The output is so low. So in fact, they wanted certain provisions in the bill.
Really?
Yes, certain provisions in the bill that can mandate employers to take care of the mental wellness of workers, including having psychosocial support within the companies as a mandatory.
Okay.
That's quite a burden on businesses. I would have assumed it would have been just fewer working hours. That's one of the things that astonished me living here, is the sheer number of hours the average employee works. So 6 days a week, 10 or 12 hours a day. You know, that's
a lot.
That's
yes.
hard.
It's a lot.
It's hard.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to be looked into. But now, from the angle of the Act, when we were working on it, those were some of the concerns. The need for more psychosocial support, the need for having these conversations within the workplace, and safe spaces within the workspace, and especially for larger organizations. And whereas
for what kind of organization?
Larger, especially the larger ones, And although I don't think we had any specific provisions towards that in the Act itself,
yes,
a lot of companies have already gone into it.
Yes, I know that for a fact. I know that there are companies which are now actively recruiting mental health professionals to provide the psychosocial support within the organization, and also just create a certain level of awareness. I also know, and I think you know this, that even associations, like now, for instance, the LSK,
yes.
I was pleasantly surprised by how aggressively they are pursuing, awareness building in terms of mental health amongst.
A lot of associations are doing it. I've spoken, I think, in LSK. I've spoken in my own fraternity. I've spoken even to doctors' fraternity, young doctors. I've spoken to them. I've spoken to nurses, because they worry about their own mental health, which is also neglected, And I mean, a lot of associations have gone into it, even without being prompted. Say, as a requirement in an act of parliament, because they realize increasingly that if your workforce is not mentally well, then as a company you will not perform.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation with Honorable Sylvia Kasanga. Thank you.